So this is how risk is going to affect the choice of investor to hold more or less assets. So the demand for an asset would be larger uh, if the risk associated with the asset is lower. So lower risk means demand for, if an asset is having lower risk, so people would demand more of it. And if an asset has got larger risk, people would demand less of it. Third component that investors look into is the liquidity. Liquidity. Every investor has like to consider various factors, and out of those various factors, liquidity is one of the factors. So, so liquidity is the easiness and quickness with which an asset can be converted into. Liquidity is what? Liquidity is the easiness and quickness with which asset can be traded for other goods and services. So, if it is if an asset is more liquid, it can be converted into other asset and other goods and services in a very shorter period of time. And this is something the desirable feature of an asset that investor consider. So money is one of the most liquid asset, and because it is easily convertible into other asset and goods and services. And like assets like automobiles and houses are less liquid in such a in a way that first, when you are willing to buy something, first you need to sell out these two kinds of assets like automobiles and houses. And for selling out these, you need to find out a suitable buyer who is willing to pay the suitable price to you, and you want to receive that price. So it might take long time and transaction cost to sell these products like automobiles and houses, these assets, and then you will be able to get some money to buy other goods and services. So that is why these automobile and houses are illiquid. The third category of asset is stocks and bonds, and these are fairly liquid compared to the automobiles and houses. Like if you purchase some stocks with the help of broker in the stock market, uh, and you are needing some money, you can just ask your broker to sell out those stock at a running price, and just like send you the money in your bank account. So in this way, stocks and bonds are fairly liquid. How bond is a liquid asset? Fairly liquid means I am comparing with the two that I have discussed previously, like houses and automobiles. And uh, like stocks were easily convertible into cash because you have a frequent access, or you have a easy access towards the stock market, or towards the person who is involving in managing your stock, that is broker. And you can exchange bond for the money using a bank. So that is why they have comparatively more liquidity. They are fairly liquid compared to automobiles and houses. So every investor will prefer the assets that are more liquid. So the demand for an asset will be larger if its liquidity is higher. So liquidity is something that investor consider while making investment choice. Now the fourth factor that is essential in portfolio allocation decision, or the fourth factor that every wealth holder or investor consider is time to maturity. So time to maturity is a concept that apply to bonds only. It apply to bonds only, which means that time to maturity is the amount of time until a financial security matures, and the investor is like repaid the principal amount. So there are various bonds, and they have got various time to maturity, like 1 year bond, 2 year bond, 3 year bond. So 3 year bond would be offering a larger rate of return compared to 1 year bond. So for investor will see if let's say I'm investing my money for 3 years into a bond, and what would be the rate of return I'll be getting from that bond? So 3-year bond is offering larger rate of return because your money is invested, or the amount of principal, like you will get principal amount after 3 years plus some rate of return on that bond. And but for 1-year bond you have lower return rate of return compared to 3-year, because its time to maturity is lower and it is offering lower rate of return. So in this way investors try to compare the time to maturity with the rate of return and decide whether they should go for the short term bond or long term bond. Short term bonds means bonds that are held by the savers for a shorter period of time and they offer lower rate of return, and bonds that offer a larger rate of return or they are being held by the people for a longer period of time and they are called long-term bonds. So in this way, investor try to compare the time to maturity with his decision of investment in bonds specifically, because it only applies to bonds. So these were the four factors like that we discussed previously, and the long term and short term thing is being discussed here, like you can see it, because long term interest rates usually exceed short term interest rate. And why does it happen? Because in long term bond there's a larger risk, like your money is being invested into a paper, or your money is invested into a government financial security for 3 years, and there's a risk involved in it. And you have if you have taken that risk, it means that uh, there should be some compensation for risk, and that compensation is in the form of larger rate of return on the long term bond compared to what is being given to you in a short term. So these are the four factors that people look into. All right, so people hold many different assets, including money, bonds, stocks, houses, and consumer durable goods like cars. Money has got low rate of return. Out of all the list of assets, money has lower rate of return, lower risk, and high liquidity. Now you can see that higher liquidity is associated with lower risk and low rate of return. Bonds have relatively higher rate of return than money, but have more risk and less liquidity. Bond cannot be frequently exchanged for buying goods and services. That is why it is relatively less liquid, but it offers some rate of return and has some level of risk as well. Whereas stocks pay dividends and can have a capital gain and losses and are much more risky than money. So we are comparing it with the most liquid asset, like we are comparing the rate of return that stocks are paying to their holders in the form of dividend and capital gain and loss, and they are risky. Ownership of a small business is very risky and not liquid at all, but pay very higher return depending on if the business is operating uh, effectively or not. And housing provides housing services and the potential for capital gains, but is illiquid. Like houses, investment in a house is also illiquid. So we have like tried to compare these uh, various assets based on the three criteria: liquidity, rate of return, and risk. So there's a table in the US economy where like assets are compared. This is not something that is very much useful to us, right? Let's let's go ahead and talk about trade-off. When we have like understood the basic criteria of evaluating the demand for asset by the investor, now we need to understand like how do they decide which asset to hold in their portfolio. So there's a trade-off among expected return, risk, liquidity, and time to maturity. Assets with low risk and high liquidity like checking accounts, like the demand deposit, like the bank accounts have low rates of return because they are most liquid, they are highly liquid. The debit card that you use is plastic money and it is a highly liquid form of money. So it has got low risk and high liquidity, but the expected return is also lower. In general, when you talk about the behavior of investor, they try to diversify their portfolio. And what is diversification? Diversification is the strategy of the investor to minimize the amount of risk by investing his wealth into various assets. Diversification is what? Diversification is a way of minimizing the risk in a given portfolio that investor is trying to hold. So it's like distributing his, spreading out investment in different assets in such a way to reduce the amount of risk. And the amount of quantity of an asset that is available in the portfolio of an investor is the demand for that asset. Similarly, if you want to know the total quantity of assets, total quantity of an asset uh, uh, demanded by all the wealth holders in the country, you need to sum up the individual demand of assets by every individual investor. In this way, you would be getting the total demand for that asset, or it would give you the total wealth that is uh, because valuing the like adding the values of assets that every investor hold will give you the total value of those assets, and the total value is called total wealth. Now this is the topic of our today's discussion: the demand for money. So now, before I start, like I need you to think about the idea that before this topic, we have been discussing a lot about the demand for asset, and and one of the all right. So so now we are going to talk about the demand for money. And demand for money, like demand for money is the quantity of monetary assets people want to hold in their portfolios. So demand for money is a quantity of assets in the form of money that people want to hold in their portfolios. Now you know that money pays no interest rate compared to other asset. Money pays zero interest rate. Currency that you have, the debit card that you have pays no interest rate. So why do people prefer to hold money even though it does not pay any rate of interest? Rather, if they would prefer to hold other asset, bonds, stock, saving account, they would definitely get some rate of return. So why do they prefer to hold money? So this is a central question of our discussion. So the answer is because money is the most liquid asset, because it is frequently converted into other asset and the goods and services. You can exchange uh, like money for other goods and other assets. That is why it is being demanded by every wealth holder. Like a wealth holder has got 100 million in his wealth and he kept 200 million in the form of money, just because it is easily convertible into other goods and services, even though money pays zero rate of return. So in every society, customers and businesses try to hold money for conducting performing transactions. So one of the reason people hold money is because of liquidity as well. Now you need to understand one thing: because money pays no rate of return, and the in the current time interest rate on stock, bond, and other asset is constant. Now, what if the interest rate on other asset goes up? How would it affect the demand? How it would be affecting the demand for money? And you need to understand another thing as well. The demand for money is the demand for Pakistani rupees that you have uh, that you have for a month, or your like everyone has in the country, like how much currency that you are having in your wallet or in your bank account is called demand for money. So demand for money is the amount of money that customers keep for conducting transaction, and the demand for money is the amount of money that businesses and government use for conducting various transactions. So this is how we define the idea of demand for money. Now, I was telling you one example, like in which I said that the interest rate on money is zero and interest rate on other asset is positive. Now, what if the interest rate on other asset goes up? Does it affect the demand for money? Yes, it would definitely affect the demand for money. How? When the interest rate on other asset increases, holding money is costly. Holding money would be costly because it does not pay any interest rate. You are sacrificing money, like you are sacrificing the interest rate that you could earn by using that money to buy alternative asset like stocks, bonds, saving account, and other things, right? But if you continue to hold money, you will continue to sacrifice the rate of return on other asset. So in this way, a larger rate of return offered on other asset will cause consumers and businesses uh, to hold lesser amount of money. Another reason, uh, another reason why investors or businesses might choose to hold lesser amount of money for conducting transaction, or as a store of wealth, uh, is inflation. Like when the country is hit by inflation, like inflation is too high, so because money is continuously losing value on daily basis, on hourly basis, on weekly basis. So in this way, it is quite risky for investors to hold a lot of their wealth or a portion of their wealth in the form of money. They would rapidly run to various to buy various other assets so that they can save the foregone rate of interest from other assets, because money is losing its value too quickly. So people would go and buy other assets rather than holding a portion of their wealth in the form of money. So we are in macroeconomics, but we'll be trying to understand the demand for money. So there are key variables, essential, or you can say these are the three important determinants of money demand in almost all the world societies. And what are these three variables? Price level, real income, interest rate. Now the first one is price level. The price level is the price, general price level. It's the price of all the goods and services. Uh, if you compare the prices of shoes that you purchased in 2010, the books that you bought for reading, uh, the fees that you paid into your school, and let's say our college, and all the goods or services that you demanded in 2010, uh, and the prices that you are paying today are different. Like prices from 2010 to 2020 today have risen a lot. So the same money today cannot buy the same amount of goods and services. So it means that when the price level increases, for performing the same transaction, you need to have more money. In this way, keeping everything else same, when the general price level in the economy goes up, you need to have like for performing same transaction, you would be needing more money. So in this way, a 1% increase in price level will bring a 1% increase in the money demand. So in this way, price level and money demand are proportional to each other. So price level is, we are done with the price level. Now we come to real income. So when real income increases, like if your income increases, you would start purchasing more of goods and services, and for purchasing more of goods and services, you will be demanding more money. So an increase in real income will cause people to demand more money. So because if we try to classify, if we try to understand, like if there's a 1% increase in real income, and does the money demand increases by 1%? No. when the real income increases by 1%, money demand might not increase by 1%. It would increase by less than 1%. And why does it happen? Because an increase in the real income by 1% means purchases would increase by less than 1%. And when purchases would increase by less than 1, because every individual in economics is assumed to be rational, which means that when their income increases, they would use some of their income in purchasing goods and services, and remaining income will be saved. So when real income increases by 1%, money demand would increase by less than 1%. So this is how an increase in real income is causing the money demand to rise, but not proportionally like it did in price level. So with keeping everything else same, if price level goes up by 1%, money demand would definitely go up by 1%, because for performing the same transaction, you need to have more amount of money, and for that you will be demanding more money. The third factor, the third variable that is essential in determining the money demand is the interest rate on other factors. Interest rate on other assets like interest rate on stock, bonds, securities, and saving account. So when the interest rate on other asset will go up, keeping everything else same, people would start using their money for investment in other assets rather than holding the amount of money. So in this way, an increase the interest rate on other asset will cause people to demand less amount of money, and uh, why they are preferring to hold less amount of money, because they are using the money to buy other assets. So in this way, an increase in the interest rate would ultimately reduce the demand for money. So interest rate and money demand are inversely proportional to each other. Like there's an inverse relationship between interest rate and demand for money. Let me give you some illustration here. So, so we are discussing the idea of money demand, and we said that there are three determinants of money demand. There are three determinants of money demand. And we know that money demand is equal to demand for currency notes and bank accounts. Currency notes, bank account, debit cards. So this is demand for money. Demand for notes, bank account, which are used in conducting transaction most freely, debit cards, and so on. This is what money demand is, right? Now, money demand function can be written as money demand is dependent on price level, real income, and the nominal interest rate. So this is money demand function, which I am calling A. A is a money demand function where MD represents the demand for currency notes, demand for bank accounts, and demand for debit cards, and so on. Now we know that with the increase in price level, there's a positive relation. Keeping these two same. If the price level goes up, money demand will go up in a proportional way. Now I can show you here that when prices are increasing, the amount it is needed for conducting transaction will be more now. With the increase in price, you will be needing more money to perform the same amount of purchases or transaction. So when price increases, money demand will definitely go up. In this way, we would say that prices are proportional to money demand. What does that mean? It means that if price increase by 1%, if there is a 1% increase in price, if there is 1% increase in price, the money demand would also go up by the same percentage, 1%. So this is what the proportional relationship between money demand and prices mean. Second, we said that with the increase in real income, people would start purchasing more goods and services. So purchases would increase. When people's income increase, they would start purchasing more goods and services. In this way, they would be demanding more money when the income increases. But what is the relationship? If income increases by 1%, money demand purchases would increase by less than 1%. So there's a less than 1% increase in money demand. In this way, we could say that there's no proportion, there's no one-to-one relationship between real income and money demand. Why? Because if the income is increasing by 1%, a portion of it goes to saving as well. So money demand would only increase by less than 1%. Third factor we have is the nominal interest rate, which is represented using I. Now this is interest rate on other assets. So when the interest rate would go up, when other assets are offering more rate of return, it means that opportunity cost of holding money would go up. Now, where does this opportunity cost comes from? Opportunity cost of holding money would go up. This would increase, and this would, when this would increase. Now, what does that mean? What does this mean? What does this opportunity cost means? It means that when interest rate on other asset is rising, holding money is costly. Because money pays no interest rate and interest rate on other asset is rising. It means that if you as an investor continue to hold money when the interest rate on other asset is rising, it means that you are sacrificing that rate of return. That is what opportunity cost of holding money is. So when the interest rate would go up, the money demand by businesses, individuals, and everyone in the economy would go down. So in this way, there's an inverse relationship between interest rate and money demand. Now we can rewrite the money demand function in a way that you now know the uh, uh, idea of money demand function. So price level is positively associated with money demand. Income is also positively associated with money demand. Interest rate is negatively related with money demand. This is money demand function. Now, we know from the previous discussion and previous chapters that nominal interest rate is that is like like the real interest rate is the difference between nominal interest rate minus inflation, expected inflation. We can rewrite this equation as in the form of nominal interest rate as real interest rate plus expected inflation. Now, can we substitute this into B in place of I? We can substitute it here to rewrite the money demand function. So money demand function now will look like money demand can also be written as money demand on the left side is equal to money demand is a function of prices. Money demand is a function of L. Now here L is being represented, L is representing functional relationship. Like in above case, F was representing the functional relationship. Now I'm putting here L instead of F. So money demand is a function of prices, income, and in place of nominal interest rate, I am substituting R plus pi E because I know that nominal interest rate is equal to this from this idea. So I can rewrite the money demand function and call it equation or function C. So this is a way of writing money demand function, but it has the same meaning like we discussed above. Now we can rewrite again in a different way, like money demand. If we just divide this price, this is the price of all goods and services in the economy, this P. So this is the nominal amount of money. This is the amount of money in the form of currency. Let's say it is equal to 100 rupees, let's say. And if you divide it with the price of 20, so 100 by 20 is 50. So this is the 50 units of goods and services that you can buy with this amount of money. So when money units of money are divided with the price level, average price level in the country, you would get how much goods you can buy with this amount of money. So this is 100, MD is 100, money demand is 100, general price level in the country is, which means the price of everything is equal to 20 on average. So dividing money demand with prices will give you how much money, how much this much amount of money can buy goods and services. This is 50 units of goods and services. So 100 units of money, when the prices of average product is 20, can buy 50 units of, 5 units rather than 50. It can buy only 5 units of goods and services. So it would be like you can purchase with the amount of, like with the 100 units of money, and if the price is 20, so you can buy 5 units of goods and services on average. So if the price would have been 2, then you can buy 50 units of goods and services on average. So in this way, keeping in view this meaning or this idea, we can rewrite the equation of money demand as money demand divided by price level. Now this is equal to real money demand. Real money demand means money demand in the form of goods and services. This is called real money demand. Now this is the money demand in the form of goods and services. So you can rewrite it as real money demand is the function of, sorry, real money demand is the function of, now I'm using L to represent the functional notation. So real money demand is a function of income and the nominal interest rate. So this is another way of writing the same money demand function, which I am calling D. That's good. All right. So we used try to show we just concluded our money demand function with its alternative expressions by writing it in various ways. And I have also told you, like if money demand is 1,000 and price level is, let's say, 100. So in an economy with average demand of money in is 1,000 and prices in that country is 100, let's say, per unit. So you can buy 10 on average 10 units of goods and services with that much amount of money. So this is what the real money demand is. All right. So now after three essential factors, we have a list of factors that are other than those three: price level, in real income, and interest rate. And what are those factors? Like these are other factors that have an impact on the demand for money people hold in their portfolios. So first factor is wealth. When the amount of wealth that people have increases, uh, it will ultimately increase the demand for money, because a portion of wealth people will always prefer to hold in the form of money. So when the amount of wealth that they have increased, that they have got, will increase, uh, it will like it will increase the demand for money. So in this way, we would say that there's a positive relationship between wealth and money demand. So when wealth increases, demand for money will also increase. Second, we have risk. So when the when the risk on other asset increases, when, let's say, buying stocks, bonds, securities, are making any investment turns out to be risky, people would keep their wealth in the form of money. In this way, demand for money will go up. So it means that when the risk on other asset will increase, it would cause people to reduce their demand for other asset and increase the demand for money. We will take a break of 10 minutes after ending this concept. Right. So I was talking about riskiness on other asset. When it is when it turns out to be risky to make investment on other asset, or when it is risky to buy other asset, people would start increasing their demand for money. So this is how an increase in risk on other asset will ultimately bring an increase in the demand for money. Another way with another way like that might make holding money risky is the irregular inflation. When there is a lot of inflation, people might be losing the value of their money that they hold in the or losing the value of wealth that they hold in the form of money. So when there is irregular inflation, they would try to switch that money into alternative assets so that they can uh, like they cannot lose the value of their wealth by holding it in the form of currency or a simple bank account that does not pay any interest rate. So in the times of inflation, people would prefer to hold other asset rather than holding money. So the list of other factors that may affect the people's demand for money is liquidity of alternative assets. What does that mean? If bonds, stocks, cars, uh, other currency, and all the assets are improving they are improving on the criteria of liquidity. They are easily convertible into easily means with minimum cost and minimum time, they are easily converted into other goods and services. So an improvement in the liquidity of alternative asset will reduce the demand for money, right? So let's say if bonds started, the liquidity of bond or liquidity of other asset like stocks or any other asset, currency, foreign currency, is increasing within the home country because they are easily convertible into other goods and services and other items. So people would reduce the demand for money. So in this way, liquidity of alternative and improvement in the liquidity of other asset will affect the demand for money. So when the liquidity of other asset, stocks, bonds, cars, and other asset will improve, the demand for money would fall. The last factor that we have in the list of other factors is the payment technologies. So before the invention of credit cards and before the improvement in the payment system, like with the introduction of ATM, now people generally don't keep cash for buying, because don't keep cash in their wallet for buying goods and services. Rather, they would keep credit cards or debit card because they know that whenever they need some cash, they would just go to ATM and withdraw some amount of money according to their need. In this way, with these with the invention of like ATMs and with the betterment of payment system, with the frequent usage like uh, when the economies in the world have tried to move on to the idea of cashless societies, which means that now payment system has evolved, or payment system has been improving in such a way that people do not need money in their wallet to buy goods and services. Rather, they can they can withdraw or use debit card and credit card to pay for various transactions. In this way, in this way, the demand for money has been reduced to the minimum. So we will talk.
Talked about other factors that may affect the demand for money. And this is a summary which describes or which lists all the macroeconomic determinants of demand for money. So first one is price level. So when the price level rises, a doubling of price level means the number of dollars needed for transactions will increase, and which will increase the demand for money proportionally. So this is the price level, impact of price level. Another variable is real income. Keeping everything else same means all other things are same in the economy. If people's income is rising, so higher real income means more transactions, and as a result, larger or greater demand for liquidity, which means that increase in real income is positively affecting the money demand. So in this way, when the real income increases, money demand would also increase, but less than proportionally. Third factor is real interest rate. So when the real interest rate on other asset increases, it means that alternative assets will be demanded in more quantity. In this way, money demand would fall. After that, we have fourth as expected inflation. And when the expected inflation increases, it means inflation in the future will increase. Now, how would it affect the current money demand? So when inflation in the future would increase, it would so if the expected inflation is going to rise, it means that higher expected inflation means lower rate of return on money. So it means that people would start converting money into other asset when they know that inflation is going to rise in the future, because money is going to lose its value in future. So they would reduce the holding of money and demand other asset. In this way, money demand is going to fall in response to expected inflation. So it means that expected inflation and money demand has got negative relationship. And you know that nominal interest rate on money is fixed. It is uh, zero, because money pays no interest rate. And when the interest rate on other asset is going to rise, or when the interest rate on other asset is going to fall, it means that uh, people might switch from other asset to money. So in this way, we would say that when the interest rate on other asset is decreasing, it means that interest rate on holding money is rising, because money provides more liquidity even though the rate of return is zero. So when the interest rate on money is rising, people would start increasing their money demand. And when I say interest rate on other asset, when I say that in nominal interest rate on money is rising, it means that nominal interest rate on other assets is falling, which is causing people to hold more. Similarly, uh, we know that there's a positive relationship between wealth and the money demand. When the wealth increases, people would prefer to hold a small fraction of their wealth in the form of money. So it would increase the demand for money. Second last is risk. Third last one. So we have risk. So whenever the risk on other asset increases, the demand for money would increase. And when the risk on other asset is going to fall, the demand for other asset would increase and the demand for money would fall. Similarly, uh, if the liquidity of alternative asset improves, when other assets are becoming more liquid, the demand for money would decrease, because other assets are also providing rate of return, and they are now easily convertible into other goods and services. That is why when the liquidity of alternative assets improve, the demand for money would fall in response to it. Last is the efficiency of payment technologies, which means that as the payment system evolves, improves over the period of time in such a way that uh, people can conduct transactions with various other forms of money rather than currency notes. And uh, so in this way, with the improvement in payment system,
people would start demanding lower and lower amounts of money. So this is how, this is a list of factors that are going to affect the demand for money, or these are known as determinants of demand for money in every economy. Now, there's a concept of elasticity, elasticities of money demand. Now, this concept is, you know that elasticity tells economists, or elasticity tells the businesses that if they are increasing the price, if we go back to microeconomics, in microeconomics, you have studied the concept of elasticity of demand. So elasticity of demand is used by suppliers to decide if they would increase the price of a product by 1%, how much sales they would expect from buyers, like how would the sales would increase or decrease depending on the 1% increase in price. So that was basically the concept of elasticity that you have studied in microeconomics. But in our discussion of money demand, illustration, in our discussion of money demand, we are saying is, so I was helping you understand the concept of uh, elasticity of money demand, and why we are discussing it. The reason for bringing the discussion of elasticity is to help you understand, like, uh, why, like, earlier we said that there's a if the income, or if the interest rate would go up, interest rate on other asset, the demand for what money would go down. With the help of elasticity, we'll be able to calculate it, like by how much the money demand would decrease when the interest rate goes up by 1%. So that is why we are interested in understanding the elasticity of money demand. So first kind of elasticity that we'll be bringing into our discussion is called interest elasticity of money demand. What does that mean? It means that uh, percentage change in money demand resulting from 1% change in interest rate. So this would give us the interest elasticity of money demand. So you can write it this way. So this is called interest elasticity of money demand. We know that there is an inverse relationship, like when the interest rate would go up, money demand would go down, money demand would decrease. We know that there's an inverse relationship between interest rate and money demand. So it means that interest elasticity of money demand would always be negative. So this formula will help us understand by how much people's demand for money changes when there's a 1% change in interest rate. So this is a formula that we are looking into. So this is being used by the central banks to know that if they would raise or decrease the interest rate, will people increase their demand for money, and based on demand for money, they would estimate that whether the demand for goods and services will rise or not. That is the practical usage of interest elasticity of money demand. That central bankers would like central bank would keep the interest rate lower to stimulate the demand in the economy, so that production can be increased. So they try to keep the interest rate lower so that most people and businesses can borrow, and they would try to predict it using the money demand, and using the elasticity of money demand. They try to see that by how much the demand for goods and services would rise when they keep the interest rate lower, or by how much the demand for money would decrease when the interest rate will be kept higher. So in this way, uh, the central banking authority and researchers try to guide the uh, central banks using their research on money demand function, or analyzing the impact of interest rate on money demand. This is the usage of the elasticity, specifically the interest elasticity. Now let's talk about another elasticity, second kind of elasticity, that is income elasticity of money demand. So I'm writing MD. So income elasticity of money demand. So it can be written as income elasticity of money demand can be written as it would be E EY or MD, or EYMD, right? So this is income elasticity of money demand. It would be equal to percentage change in money demand resulting from a 1% change in income. A 1% change in income. So this would, we know that there's a positive relationship between income and money demand. So this magnitude of income elasticity of money demand will always be positive. So when income increases, money demand increases. So this value would always be greater than zero, because of the relationship between income and money demand. So when this is a way of quantifying elasticity, provides a tool that is useful for understanding by how much, like how the how people are going to change their demand for money when there's a 1% change in 1% change in income. So this would be guided to us by the income elasticity of it. So we have discussed this description. So income elasticity of money demand. Income elasticity is always positive, which means that higher income increases the money demand. And you also know that less than one means when the income increases by 1%, demand for money increases by less than 1%. So that is why income elasticity is always less than 1. We have another elasticity, that is interest elasticity of money demand. Now, there's a this is small and negative, which means that higher interest rate on other asset, which we call non-monetary asset, reduces the demand for money slightly. Third, we can also find out the price elasticity of money demand, which means by how much if the percentage change in price is one, if the prices are going to change by 1%, by how much the money demand would change. So we already know that there's a one-to-one relationship between money demand and prices. So it means that price elasticity of money demand is equal to 1, which is unitary, which we say in economics as unitary. So this was the concept of demand for like elasticity of money demand. Now there is another important concept in this chapter, which is called velocity. Velocity means Velocity means by how much a rupee is used in transactions. Velocity means by how much a rupee is used in transaction. This was given by this velocity was calculated for the first time by a quantity theorist, which was known as Irving Fisher, and his theory is known as quantity theory of money. So quantity theory of money calculated or provided help in calculating the velocity of money. Now velocity of money means how much times a rupee or a paper note of 10 or a paper how much times a rupee is used in transaction, or how much times money is changing hands in transactions. So this velocity of money can be calculated by by dividing nominal GDP, that is price times output. This is aggregate price level. This is aggregate supply. So when you multiply price times quantity, so it would be equal to nominal GDP with the available amount of money supply. Now from our previous discussion, you know that the money printed by the central bank must be in proportion to the output produced in the economy. And in velocity, these both variables are going to decide how much money or how much a single rupee is used in transaction, or how many hands a rupee is changing while conducting transaction. So this would be guided to us by the concept of velocity. So I can help you in. You can see it from here. So now I'm going to talk about the concept of velocity. Velocity is not similar to velocity in physics. This is velocity of money. Velocity and QTM. QTM means quantity theory of money. Because I don't have much space, I'm writing it QTM. QTM was a theory by Irving Fisher in 1911, who defined the concept of velocity of money. So we when we are calculating the velocity of money, it is equal to nominal GDP. It is equal to what? Nominal GDP divided by the money stock, or the supply of money in the country. So in a current year, nominal GDP and money stock both will be fixed. Now what we are trying to find out, we know that nominal GDP is equal to price level. This is aggregate price level multiplied by output, and we know that money stock is equal to money supply. Money stock is equal to supply of money, which is in control of central bank. What we are trying to find out, velocity, and we can calculate it as V is equal to V velocity is equal to P times Y, which is nominal GDP divided by money supply. Now there are no values provided by the book, but let me provide you some hypothetical example. That suppose if nominal GDP is 1000 and money supply is, let's say, 1000 billion, and let's say money supply is 10 billion, right? So you would find out if money supply is 10 billion, or let's say let's make it let me help you making more sense out of it. So let's say for example that money supply is 1000 and 1000 billion, or let's say this is equal to the GDP and this is equal to the money supply, and this would give us what? This would give us a value of 10. Now this 10 is telling us that in a country with 100 billion output and 100, let's say, million, or 1000 billion output and 100 billion printed amount of money,
On average, every note or every rupee will be changing 10 hands, or 10 times a rupee will be used in transactions. But in practical cases, this velocity of money is always between 2 and 3. So it means that in practical, in every almost in every transaction, a rupee changes hands 2 or 3 times. So this velocity means, now here v is equal to 10. Now v equal to 10 means this 10 rupee will be used, or like 10 magnitude is telling us that every rupee will be used in 10 transactions. So this 10 is telling us what? That every rupee will be used in 10 number of, or every rupee will change hands 10 times. So this is a times, this 10 is equal to the number of times a rupee is used in transaction. This is what the definition of velocity is. And I told you that in practice, it generally comes equal to let's say this velocity in practical. If you just try to search it about what is the value of velocity in practical, you would get a value of 2 or 3, which means that in every in a country like Pakistan, every rupee is used twice or thrice in conducting transactions. Now this is a velocity of M1 and M2 in 19 from 1959 to 2009 and for the US economy. Now you can see that it seems to be increasing initially, and then there are ups and downs, and these ups and downs are representing that M1 includes the M1 is the most nearest definition of money. It includes currency and demand deposit. So it has fluctuated in US economy in various years because of various reasons. And M2 velocity of M2 has remained fairly stable. You can see here that it seems like a horizontal line. Uh, so which means it has remained fairly stable over the period of time from 1959 to 2009. So because velocity has not remained stable, it means that money growth can also money growth cannot be expected to remain stable. So this is these are the fluctuations in growth of M1, growth rates of M1 and M2. These are like fluctuations representing the growth rate of M1 and M2. There is another version of quantity theory of money, where real money demand is dependent on the real income. What does that mean? This version of quantity theory of money, where we have on the left side we have MD over P, which is real money demand, and it is function of a constant times Y. So it seems like a linear equation. It seems like a linear equation where Y variable is real money demand, which is the money demand in the form of money, in the form of goods and services you can buy with that money. So this is real money demand in the form of goods and services. And on the right side we have income. This is a coefficient of income, which is constant K. Now this equation is in economics has some meaning. This tells us what? That real money demand is proportional to real income. What does that mean? It means that if income increases by 1%, the real money demand would also increase by 1%. And what does that mean in simple language? It means that if income of an individual increases by 1%, keeping everything else same, keeping everything else same means uh, all other factors are same. If income is increasing by 1%,
the goods that you can buy with the amount of money that you have will increase by 1%. That is real money demand. So this relationship is to be summarized by this version of equation of money demand. Now here, what are the assumptions? That velocity is constant. Velocity is constant. Uh, and we are assuming velocity, constant velocity, because we are assuming that with the increase in income, a rupee, like the, a rupee, like we can say that with the increase in income or increase or decrease in interest rate, the velocity, the rate at which money was changing hands will not be affected. So this is what the assumption of this equation is. In order for this equation to hold, in order for what we are saying to hold, to hold true, is that velocity is constant and it is not affected by income or interest rate. But in practical life, in real life, velocity is affected by income. When people have more income, they would buy more goods and services, and more money will be circulating hands, changing hands in the economy. And and similar is the case with interest rate. When interest rate decreases, more people would borrow money, and more people will use it to buy various goods and services. In this way, money would change a larger number of hands than what is predicted by this theory. But because it's a theory, so to validate it, to like hold it true, we need to assume that uh, when the income increases, keeping everything else same, if the income increases by 1%, the real money demand would also increase by 1%. So this is what this expression or this version of quantitative theory of money means. So this is these are some extension, like this is the idea that but velocity of m1 is not constant in real. It rose steadily in from 1960 to 80, and it has been irregular. Erratic means irregular since then. So velocity cannot be assumed to cannot be for our for proving our theory. We can assume it to be constant, but in real it does not remain constant. Velocity changes with the period of time. So financial innovation have caused velocity to change, improve or decrease, increase or decrease. Here now this is the last topic of our discussion, the asset market. So this is the third market. From the beginning of our course, we have talked about labor market, we have talked about the goods market. Now we are in this asset, in the chapter of asset market, money and prices. Now we are going to talk about the asset market. This is the last topic that I'm going to summarize in a 10 minutes, right? So uh, your patience is required, right? And your attention as well. So the asset market equilibrium. So we know that the term asset market, a asset market means a market where various assets are being purchased and sold. And what kind of various asset? There are two uh, kinds of asset: real and financial asset. The real asset means cars, houses, and financial asset like stocks, bonds, foreign currency, saving account, and all other assets. But we know that we are in macroeconomics. We'll be using aggregation. We'll be not looking into micro details of each of the market, although each market is different from each other. Like asset market, when you are saying a general term, when you are using a general term to describe all the markets: bond market, stock market, currency market. So all these, we are not going to differentiate in each of the market. We are using a general term because we are in macroeconomics, to avoid the micro details of each of these markets, because we are interested to know uh, a framework, or we are interested to understand a framework that is working in a way that it justifies the working of all the all the form of asset markets. So assume that all assets can be grouped in two categories. So let's do some illustration.
Now we are about to conclude this. Before that, let me just develop some brief idea of asset market. Now what we are saying is this is a general term which includes various kinds of asset, but we are taking two. We are like for our simplicity, we are assuming that there are only two kinds of asset in the economy. One is monetary or money. Monetary asset and non-monetary asset. Monetary asset includes money, credit card, debit card, and non-monetary asset includes all other assets like car, houses, stock, bonds. Non-monetary asset. So we are assuming this for our simplicity. Non-monetary assets. So these are two kinds of assets that we are bringing in our discussion. So we know that the let's say supply of money is in control of central bank. So supply of money is fixed in the current time, at least in the current time is fixed. Supply of money is fixed, and supply of all other asset, supply of non-monetary asset is also fixed. So by assuming these, by applying these assumptions, we can, let's say, we are assuming that Ahmad, let's say Ahmad is having some wealth, and he is holding his wealth in some form of money, and he is investing his remaining wealth in non-monetary assets. So this is the Ahmad's demand for money, and this is the Ahmad's demand for non-monetary asset. So if we sum these up, like if we add this up, we would get Ahmad's total wealth. So Ahmad's total wealth will be equal to demand for money plus the demand for non-monetary asset. And if we have to find out the overall economy's wealth, what we will do, we would sum up every individual's demand for money. We would sum up every individual demand for money by with the every individual's demand for non-monetary asset to get the national wealth. To get national wealth. So when we have got national wealth, so we are calling it, let's say we are calling it equation E, right? So we are calling it equation E. Now we already know that the supply of money is fixed and supply of non-monetary asset is fixed. So what we can do is we can write supply of money with notation of M and supply of non-monetary asset with NN. So this is equal to the availability of those assets. So this is national wealth. So this is equal to availability of those, and I'm calling F, right? So what I can do is I can subtract F from E. I can subtract F from E. So how would it look like? So I'm subtracting F from E. So MD minus M. So this is MD stands for money supply of in an economy, and this is money. This is MD stands for money demand, and this is money supply plus I can write demand for non-monetary asset. Demand for non-monetary asset has to be subtracted from demand for supply of non-monetary asset. So this is how it looks like when you subtract F from E, which means you are subtracting the supply from the demand of money and assets in an economy. So we know that this is known as excess demand for money, because money demand is subtracted from money supply.
and this is known as excess supply of this is excess demand for money, and this is excess demand for non-monetary asset. And we also know that in every economy, uh, money demand is equal to money supply. So when money demand is equal to money supply, this would turns out to be zero. And we also know that we also assume that demand for non-monetary asset is equal to supply of non-monetary asset. So this would also turn out to be zero. This would also turn out to be zero. It means that for the goods market to be in equilibrium, it is very necessary. Oh, sorry, for the asset market to be in equilibrium, it is very necessary that money demand in the economy must be equal to money supply. So this is the asset market equilibrium condition. This is what the condition for asset market equilibrium. Like in every economy, the asset market will be in equilibrium when money demand in that economy is equal to